Well, the song leader asked me to apologize for his rudeness at saying he was happy to not see you all. That slip of the tongue was not his intention, and be confident that he is chastising himself as we speak. So my children decided that it would be a good idea that I looked different because they didn't want to see me this often standing up in front doing these things. So they thought a little variety would be helpful. So I hope other people find a little humor out of that as well. I'm going to go ahead and get that started there. All right, so the title of my message today is My Signs and My Wonders. And if you begin turning to Exodus chapter 7, the verses that we'll be looking at are verses 1 through 5, in particular verse 3. But when you think about it, after the flood, or other than the flood, the most recognizable or universally recognizable incident coming out of the Old Testament is the Exodus, something that we just finished with the Spring Holy Days, remembering. But I think we'll find that when you look at it, most people completely misunderstand that event. Part of it has to do with the idea that they're called the 10 plagues of Israel, or of Egypt, 10 plagues of Egypt. The Bible never refers to them as plagues. So if we read there in Exodus chapter 7, starting in verse 1, and it says, "And the Lord said to Moses, See, I have made you a god to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be a prophet. And you shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh. And he will send away the sons of Israel from his land," from Pharaoh's land. "And I will harden the heart of Pharaoh, and I will multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh will not listen to you, and I will put my hand on Egypt, and will bring my armies and my people, the sons of Israel, from the land of Egypt with a great judgment. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, whom I send forth my hand on Egypt, and bring out the sons of Israel from in their midst." God doesn't call them plagues. In fact, when you look throughout the scripture, they're never referred to by any of the writers that I was able to find as plagues. Instead, they're consistently referred to as signs and wonders. And this example here in Exodus 7, where God is pushing Moses and detailing what it is that he's going to do and how he's going to fulfill this prophecy that they were well aware of, the Israelites were well aware of, that he makes so clear to them that this is his work and that they're signs and wonders. They're not plagues. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. As we're walking through our daily lives, and certainly I think it's heightened at this point, but the negativity exists before this, and it will exist long after the current pandemic thing that's going on is finished. Because the assault of Satan against us is always the same. But the perspective that we have to have as people, as followers of God, of people who understand his truth, that perspective in being able to say, this is not a plague, it is a sign and a wonder. And so that's what I want to explore a little bit today, because we should be looking at this differently. Let's look at the things that are going on currently and use this verse out of Exodus, or this series of verses out of Exodus 7, to try to help refocus ourselves to have a different perspective, a godly perspective on the way we deal with our lives and issues that go on in our lives. One, we want to focus on what's important. And I'm only going to pick one thing out of here. I know we had a sermonette a couple of weeks ago that talked about remembering your first love. Critically important, right? This isn't the only important thing. There's also a strong case that I struggled with in that, the Micah verse where it talks about that you need to, the few things that you have to do, basically that you have to love and to glorify God. That's what's truly important. And those are all true, but what I wanted to focus on here is what God was focusing on in Exodus 7. He talks about specific things that he's doing, that he's going to bring his armies, his peoples, his sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt, and that he was going to teach the Egyptians that they would know show to the Egyptians that they would know that he is the Lord. So if we turn to 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 6 through 11, I want to talk about focusing, or this verse talks about focusing on what is important that we need to be doing during this time if we have an appropriate perspective. The perspective of what is going on is a sign and a wonder, not a plague. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 6 through 11. For to this end also the gospel was preached to the dead, that they may be judged according to the men in the flesh, but might live according to God in the Spirit. But the end of all things has drawn near, and this is Peter writing. Be of sound mind, then, and be sensible to prayers, and above all things, having fervent love towards yourselves, because love will cover a multiple of sins, quoting Proverbs chapter 10, verse 12. Be hospitable to one another without murmurings, each one as he received a gift, ministering to ourselves as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If anyone speaks, let the words be of God. If anyone ministers, as by the strength that God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified, through Jesus Christ, to whom the glory and the might to the ages of ages. Amen. So Peter is encouraging us here that we need to take this opportunity to make sure we focus on the things that are important, to focus on our brethren, to minister as we have been given gifts to those around us. And I know I always find it interesting because Peter is saying the comment that he makes in verse 7 where he says, and the end of all things is drawing near. It's important that we see this not just today when the world is sharing in this anxiety, but that we see this day by day because we don't know when our end is to come. I read a commentary where the individual made an interesting point. They said Christ has already died. Even when Peter wrote this, Christ had already died, which means in theory the plan of God at any moment can be completed. That was the missing piece. Man has been redeemed. It's a matter of God wishing for none to perish, that he is extending it out. So we have to be careful and mindful that we're not, or that we're focusing on this most important thing, that we're not procrastinating in saying, oh, well, I think I can wait because I'm waiting for this sign, or I think I can wait because I think this is going to happen first. It doesn't have to. The plan at this point is functionally complete. So that's one of the things that we need to see. Whenever things are going on around us, we have to see that's not something that needs to be focused on. Instead, we need to focus on the things that are important, that we serve God for his glory by using the gifts he has given to us and serving others to the best of our ability. By being of a sound mind and then being sensible to prayers, which I think is an interesting concept. Sensible to prayers. I know it's one of the things that my parents taught me, and I'm trying to diligently teach my children. When you're afraid, when you're happy, when you're sad, whatever is going on, are you praying about it? Are you talking to God about it? Being sensible in our prayers, understanding that the only sensible thing to do at any moment is to pray. I think that's what Peter is trying to talk about there a little bit. So as we look at the life that's going on around us, being able to focus on what is the things that are not calling things plagues, the things that happen to us, but instead being able to focus on them as signs and wonders, this is what God calls us to do, not to lose sight of what is the most important. The second thing, don't get lost in the hype. If you turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, we'll read verses 9 through 11. I find it interesting as I'm kind of keeping abreast of the news of what's going on, as I think most of us are. Some of it's to snicker, but a lot of it is with fear. It's somebody made the comment the other day, it's not that I'm afraid of the disease. I'm afraid of the people's reaction to the disease. And that becomes something that I think is very mindful. But we had some interesting stories that I read the other day. There seemed to be this focused attention on the national parks because nobody's showing up to the parks. The animals are really having a heyday. That they're really enjoying what's going on. They're seeing all kinds of animals in numbers that they didn't even know existed because there aren't people there. I think that's an interesting perspective that we can have. As I was driving out here today, I see this little cat in the ditch. And the little cat is focused on something. I don't know what it's trying to hunt, but it's still, it's ready to pounce. And it's sitting there, and it just hit me. That cat does not care about viruses. That cat doesn't care about anything but what God planted in its mind through instinct to do. It's continuing to live the way that it would normally live. And to fulfill, honestly, the phrase, ignorance is bliss. The cat just doesn't know. We have the opportunity to know, but yet we would be best served by not focusing on those things and instead not believing the hype. And we'll get into that a little bit later with the third point going on. The other thing that I think we have to keep in mind is so many of the people who produce news or the things that we read every day, they don't share our worldview. You look at the policies being talked about with the CDC, and you talk about these people who are studying diseases, and you look at the papers they write and the things that they say. They are desperately trying to save mankind. But the fatal flaw is that they can't. And because they don't know that, because they don't work from the premise that we understand because he tells us that we're lost, we can't save ourselves. So because we can't save ourselves, it's not like we're being silly about it. We still want to be sensible. But we sure as heck don't want to be trying to save everything. These people are working from that mindset. They think it's up to them to save mankind. And that's why they're desperately doing whatever they can in their wisdom and out of a willingness of their heart, but they don't understand what pieces they are missing. The other thing to keep in mind, I think, is these are not unprecedented times to God. I love that phrase, unprecedented. You hear that all over the place. Or new normals or disruptive. God is not shocked. He's not concerned. They're not unprecedented to God. The Bible history, if we study it, is full of times when people have suffered, when calamity has befallen mankind, and God's still there. To him, the one whom we depend on, there's nothing that phases him. And he encourages us in his word. He tells us that in his word. He tells us, don't worry. Now, I will admit, I worry. But that's because it's something I must overcome, not something I want to spend my time on. Each generation faces challenges and those types of things and difficulties that God helps them overcome. That's why God tells us to trust him. He tells us that we are to do the things that will bring us closer to him because he wants to prove himself to us. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. That which has been, it is that which shall be. And that which has been done, it is that which will be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there a thing of which one might say, see, that is new? It has been for the ages which were before us. There is no memory of former things, yea, nor is there any memory from them of things which will be afterwards, for those who will be at the last. Comforting words, I think, because we may not know, but he knows. And he tells us that he knows. And he tells us, don't be afraid. I've got this in hand. And that leads me to my third point. I want to see how bad I'm doing on time. Not bad at all. That leads me to my third point. Remember who we serve. Go ahead and start turning to Isaiah chapter 46, verses 9 through 13. When reading that opening verse, the Exodus chapter 7, verse 3, Exodus chapter 7. One of the things when I pulled my title out of verse 3, it says, I will multiply my signs and my wonders. What I find interesting there is, and I think we need to key in on, is he says, I will multiply. The assumption there is that there were already signs and wonders, which there were. We know there were. People were living. The earth was working. Blessings were happening. People were eating. There were people living without fear. Even in slavery, they had a certain sense of what's the word when you're happy, or your contentment? That's the word I was looking for. Sorry. There was a certain sense of contentment, and that contentment was something that they were able to work from. So even in those cases, he was, if we were to look at the situation Israel was in and look at it from the perspective of plagues, yes, they were slaves. But instead, if we look at it from the perspective of signs and wonders, they would find those things day by day that were signs and wonders. And God just said, I'm going to multiply them. I'm going to make them more evident to you and bigger. And that's what he did. Isaiah chapter 46, verses 9 through 13. Remember former things from forever, for I am God, and no one else is God, even none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from the past these things which were not done, saying, my counsel shall rise, and I will do all my desires. Calling a bird of prey from the east, and the man of my counsel from a far-off land. Yes, I have spoken. Yes, I will cause it to come. I have formed. Yes, I will do it. Listen to me, mighty ones of heart, who are far from righteousness. That's us. I bring near my righteousness. I shall not be far off. My salvation shall not wait. I will place salvation in Zion, my glory for Israel. The bottom line is God has this in hand. To close, let's turn to the book of Isaiah again. You're actually already there. Back a couple of pages to chapter 55. As we go forth into the rest of the week or the upcoming week, remember, Christ died for you. He gave his life for you. The sun rose, you took in nourishment most days, and you were able to successfully live. All of these are signs and wonders. Remember, this is not our home. Things that happen bad things that happen here are to be expected. He tells us that they're going to happen. So instead of focusing on those, we need to be focusing on the plan that he has laid for us, that we just started with the previous holy days talking about. The plan that he has for us, and be confident that he has the power to execute it. Isaiah 55, verses 8 through 13. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor my ways your ways. For as the heavens are high from the earth, so my ways are high from your ways, my thoughts from your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow comes down from the heavens, and does not return there, except it waters the earth and makes it bring forth and bud, and gives seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so my word shall be, which goes out of my mouth. It will not return to me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please. And it shall prosper in what I sent it to do. God has it in hand. It's not unprecedented to him. He has the power to fulfill the plan. Brethren, as the world around us focus on plagues, let us, through his wisdom, focus on his signs and wonders.